The hall was silent, except for the sound of a chain dragging across stone. Guards stood in 2 straight lines, their faces hard, their eyes forward. Torches burned along the walls, throwing long shadows across the marble floor. At the far end of the hall, on a high seat carved from black wood, sat King Draven Ashgrove. He did not move. He did not blink. His hands rested on the arms of his chair like a man carved from the same stone as his kingdom. Before him knelt a young man named Callum Briar, his wrists bound, his shirt torn at the shoulder, his head bowed low. He had been dragged from the dungeon only minutes before, and now the entire court watched to see what the king would decide. "You were found near the border with maps of our defenses," Draven said. His voice was calm, but it carried through the hall like thunder rolling over distant hills. "Maps that should never have left this castle. Explain yourself, or accept your fate." Callum lifted his head. His eyes were red, not from guilt, but from exhaustion. "My king, I did not take those maps. I swear it on my family's name." A murmur passed through the crowd of nobles, standing along the sides of the hall. Someone laughed quietly. Someone else whispered a word that sounded like traitor. Draven raised his hand. The murmurs stopped instantly. "Every man who has stood where you kneel has said the same thing," Draven said. "Innocence is the last word spoken before judgment falls." He looked toward the captain of his guard, a broad man named Osric who stood near the throne with his arms crossed. Osric gave a small nod, the kind of nod that meant everything was ready. The guards near Callum shifted their weight, preparing to carry out whatever order came next. Draven raised his hand higher. It was the signal. Everyone in the hall understood what it meant. And that was when she moved. From the edge of the crowd, near a pillar where the servants usually stood quiet and unseen, a young woman stepped forward. She wore the plain gray dress of palace staff, her dark hair pulled back, her hands still faintly dusted with flour from the kitchens. Her name was Alara Vane, though almost no one in that hall knew it. To them, she was simply one of the many servants who cleaned floors and carried trays and never spoke unless spoken to. But now she walked straight toward the throne, past the guards, past the nobles who turned to stare at her in shock, past every rule that said a servant should never approach the king uninvited, let alone during a sentencing. "Stop," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the hall like a blade through silk. Every head turned. Every breath seemed to catch at once. Osric moved first, stepping toward her with his hand already reaching for her arm. "Get back, girl. Have you lost your mind?" But Alara did not stop. She reached the base of the throne, climbed the first step before anyone could catch her, and placed her hand directly on King Draven's forearm. The hall went completely silent. No one in living memory had touched the Alpha King without his permission. Not a noble, not a soldier, not even the healers who tended his wounds after battle, waited for his word, before laying a single finger on him. And yet here was a servant girl, uninvited, unafraid, her hand resting firmly on his arm, as if she had every right in the world to be there. Draven turned his head slowly. His eyes, usually cold and controlled, widened for just a moment. Something passed through him that he could not name, a jolt that started where her skin touched his, and spread through his chest, like fire catching dry wood. His wolf, the part of him that had been silent and obedient for years, suddenly surged forward, with a force he had not felt since he was a young man newly crowned. He almost pulled away. His instincts screamed at him to remove her hand, to call for guards, to remind the entire court why he was feared. But he did not move. He could not move. He simply stared at her, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, the King of Blackthorn did not know what to say. "You dare touch me," he finally said, his voice low, dangerous, but strangely uncertain at the edges. "I do," Alara answered, and though her hand trembled slightly, she did not remove it. "Because he is innocent, and if you kill him now, you will have made a mistake you cannot undo." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few nobles reached for the hilts of ceremonial daggers at their belts, more out of habit than any real intention to use them. Osric stood frozen, unsure whether to pull the girl away or wait for his king's command. Draven studied her face. There was no fear in her eyes, only a fierce and steady conviction. It was strange, he thought, how a servant girl could stand before the most powerful man in the kingdom and look at him, not with terror, but with determination. "And how would you know such a thing?" he asked. "Do you have proof, or only feelings? I have both, Elara said. Give me until sunset tomorrow. If I am wrong, you may carry out the sentence then, and I will accept whatever punishment you see fit for interrupting your court. The hall waited, breathless, for the king's response. Draven looked down at her hand, still resting on his arm, and felt that strange warmth again, spreading through his chest like something waking after a long sleep. He did not understand it, and he did not like things he could not understand. Remove your hand, he said quietly. Elara did, stepping back at once, her face pale but composed. Draven turned to Callum, who still knelt on the floor, watching the exchange with wide, hopeful eyes. Then he looked out at his court, at the nobles whispering behind their hands, at Osric standing rigid near the throne, at every eye in the hall fixed on him, waiting to see if he would show weakness or wisdom. The execution is postponed, Draven said at last. Until sunset tomorrow, the prisoner will remain in the dungeon. Guards, take him back. The hall erupted into low, urgent whispers the moment the words left his mouth. No one could remember the last time King Draven had reversed a decision, once his hand was raised. Some nobles exchanged glances of disbelief. Others turned to stare at Elara, who stood quietly by the throne, her hands folded in front of her, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Osric leaned close to the king's ear. My lord, are you certain? The council will ask questions. Let them ask, Draven said, his eyes still fixed on Elara. Bring the girl to my private chamber after the hall is cleared. Osric's eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing more. He simply nodded and turned to organize the guards escorting Callum back to the dungeon. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, whispering among themselves about the strange scene they had just witnessed, Elara stood near the throne, feeling the weight of dozens of curious stares on her back. She kept her eyes low, her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. She had taken an enormous risk, one that could have ended with her in chains beside Callum, but she had not seen another option. The evidence she carried was too important to wait for proper channels that had already failed an innocent man once. She thought of her brother Nathaniel, waiting for her outside the castle walls, hidden in the shadow of the old grain mill where they had agreed to meet. He would be wondering why she had not yet returned with news. She thought of her family, exiled years ago on false charges brought by men still sitting comfortably within these castle walls. She thought of the months she had spent scrubbing floors and serving meals, listening at doorways, gathering whispers that most nobles never realized servants could hear. And she thought of the strange sensation that had passed through her the moment her hand touched the king's arm. It had felt like touching something alive and ancient, something that recognized her even though they had never met. She pushed the thought away. There was no time for confusion. There was only the mission, and the mission had just become far more complicated. The great hall slowly emptied, until only a handful of guards remained near the doors. Draven rose from his throne for the first time since the sentencing had begun, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the floor as he descended the steps. Come with me, he said to Elara, his voice quieter now that the crowd had thinned. She followed him without a word, her legs unsteady, but her spine straight, refusing to show the fear coiling tightly in her stomach. They passed through a side corridor lined with old paintings of past kings, their painted eyes seeming to follow her as she walked. Guards nodded respectfully to Draven as they passed, though their eyes lingered curiously on the servant girl walking just behind him. At last they reached a heavy wooden door, guarded by 2 silent soldiers. Draven pushed it open, revealing a private chamber lit by a single fireplace, its walls lined with shelves of old books and maps of the kingdom. He gestured for her to enter, then closed the door behind them, leaving the noise of the castle outside. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Draven stood near the fireplace, his back to her, staring into the flames as though searching for answers there. Elara remained near the door, unsure whether she was meant to speak first or wait for his command. Finally, he turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Tell me your name. Elara, she said. Elara Vane. He repeated it quietly, as though testing the sound of it. And you serve in the kitchens. I do, my king. Yet you speak like someone far more educated than a servant girl, Draven said, his eyes narrowing slightly. And you move with a confidence I have never seen in anyone who serves within these walls, let alone someone willing to risk their life to touch me in front of my entire court. Elara felt her pulse quicken. She had known this conversation would come, but she had not expected it to arrive so quickly, or with such intensity in his gaze. I only wish to prevent an innocent man from losing his life, my king, nothing more. Do not lie to me, Draven said, his voice low but firm, though not unkind. I have sat on this throne long enough to know when someone is hiding far more than they are showing. You will tell me everything you know about Callum Briar, and you will tell me why a kitchen servant risked execution to defend a stranger. Elara swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his stare pressing down on her like a physical force. She had prepared many answers for many possible questions, but she had not prepared for the strange warmth still lingering where his eyes met hers, a warmth that made the careful walls around her heart feel suddenly, dangerously thin. He is not a stranger to me, she said finally. But if you wish to know why, my king, you will have to give me time. There is more at stake here than one man's life, and I am not yet certain how much I can safely tell you. Draven studied her for a long moment, the fire crackling softly between them. Then, to her surprise, the corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but something close to one. You are either the bravest servant in this kingdom, he said quietly, or the most foolish one I have ever met. Perhaps I am both, Elara answered. And for the first time since the sentencing had begun, the hard lines around the Alpha King's eyes softened, just slightly, as the court outside continued to whisper about the servant girl who had stopped an execution with nothing more than a single touch. Draven did not sleep that night. He sat alone in his private chamber, long after Elara had been escorted back to the servants' quarters under careful watch, staring into the dying fire as questions circled endlessly through his mind. He was a man who prided himself on control, on making decisions swiftly and without hesitation. Yet in the span of a single afternoon, a servant girl had made him postpone an execution, question his own instincts, and feel something he had buried so deep he had almost convinced himself it no longer existed. He rubbed his forearm where her hand had rested, half expecting to find a mark there, though of course there was nothing visible. Still, the sensation lingered, a warmth beneath the skin that refused to fade no matter how many hours passed. His wolf, usually a quiet and disciplined presence within him, paced restlessly at the edges of his mind. It had not reacted this way in years, not since the loss that had hardened him into the king he had become. He had trained himself to ignore its instincts, to rule with logic rather than the primal urges that had once nearly destroyed him. But tonight, his wolf refused to be silent. Mate, it whispered, over and over, the single word echoing through him like a drumbeat he could not silence. Draven stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the castle grounds. Moonlight spilled across the courtyard below, illuminating the guards on their nightly rounds. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought as foolishness. Mates were rare, and the bond, when it occurred, was said to be instant and undeniable from both sides. Yet Elara had shown no sign of the same reaction. She had touched him out of desperation, not recognition. Perhaps his wolf was simply reacting to the shock of being touched so boldly for the first time in years, nothing more. He told himself this several times throughout the night, and each time, he found it harder to believe. By morning, word of the previous day's events had spread through every corner of the castle. Servants whispered in hallways. Guards exchanged glances during their shifts. Even the youngest kitchen boys knew that the king had postponed an execution because of something a servant girl had said, though few knew the full truth of what had happened in the throne room. Osric arrived at Draven's chamber shortly after sunrise, his expression carefully neutral, though Draven could see the questions burning behind his eyes. The council wishes to speak with you, Osric said. They are concerned about the delay in Callum Briar's sentencing. Let them be concerned, Draven replied, pulling on his coat. I will address the council when I have gathered the facts, not before. And the girl? Osric asked carefully. Elara Vane, what do you intend to do with her? Draven paused, his hand resting on the door. I intend to learn who she truly is. Osric raised an eyebrow but said nothing further, following his king out into the corridor. Meanwhile, in the servants' quarters, Elara sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. She had barely slept, replaying the moment in the throne room, again and again in her mind. She had known the risk she was taking when she stepped forward, but she had not anticipated the reaction that followed. the strange current that had passed between them the instant her hand touched his skin. She had heard stories, of course, whispered among the older servants late at night, tales of fated bonds between wolves that could not be explained by logic or reason. She had always dismissed them as folklore, comforting stories, told to give hope to lonely hearts. But the sensation she had felt yesterday had been undeniably real, a pull so strong it had nearly stolen the breath from her lungs. She pushed the thought away as firmly as she could. There was no room in her plans for fate or bonds, or anything that might distract her from the true purpose that had brought her into this castle. Her family's exile, the false charges that had stripped them of their land and titles, the years spent hiding in the shadows of villages that no longer welcomed them, all of it demanded her full attention. She could not afford to be distracted by a king's confusion, no matter how strange the connection between them had felt. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a young guard standing stiffly in the hallway. "The king requests your presence," he said, immediately. Ilara's stomach tightened, but she nodded and followed him through the winding corridors of the castle, past curious glances from other servants, who had clearly heard the rumors already circulating about her. By the time they reached the private council chamber, her palms were damp with nervous sweat, though her expression remained calm and composed. Inside, Draven stood near a long table covered with maps and documents, Osric beside him, along with two members of the royal council she recognized only by sight. One was Lord Edmund Castellan, a thin man with sharp eyes and a reputation for cunning that made even the bravest soldiers uneasy in his presence. The other was Lady Beatrice Hallow, an older woman known for her sharp tongue and even sharper judgment. "Ilara Vane," Draven said, gesturing for her to step forward. "The council wishes to understand why you interrupted a royal sentencing yesterday." Lord Edmund studied her with an expression of cold curiosity. "A servant girl, defending a convicted traitor. Tell us, girl, what connection do you have to Callum Briar that would compel you to risk your own life for his?" Ilara kept her voice steady, though her heart pounded fiercely beneath her calm exterior. "I have information suggesting the maps found in his possession were placed there deliberately, to frame him for a crime he did not commit." "And what proof do you have of this claim?" Lady Beatrice asked, her sharp eyes narrowing. "I have witnesses," Ilara said carefully, "and documents that prove the maps were altered after they were taken from the castle archives, not before." A murmur passed between the council members. Lord Edmund's expression darkened slightly, though he quickly composed himself. "And where, exactly, did a kitchen servant obtain such documents?" Ilara hesitated for only a moment before answering. "I have connections beyond the kitchens, my lord. Connections that have allowed me to gather information others might overlook." Draven watched the exchange closely, noting the flicker of tension that passed across Lord Edmund's face at her words. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Draven had spent years learning to read the smallest signs of deception among his advisors, and something about the councilman's reaction struck him as far too careful, far too controlled. "Bring your evidence before sunset," Draven said finally. "If it proves true, Callum Briar will be released, and those responsible for framing him will face justice in his place." Lord Edmund's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly, but he bowed stiffly. "As you wish, my king." As the council members filed out of the chamber, Draven remained behind with Ilara, watching her carefully as the door closed, leaving them alone once more. "You are hiding something far larger than a simple concern for justice," he said quietly. "I saw the way Lord Edmund reacted to your words. You know something about him, don't you?" Ilara met his gaze steadily. "I suspect a great deal, my king, but suspicion is not proof, and I will not accuse a member of your council without evidence strong enough to withstand his defense." Draven studied her for a long moment, admiring, despite himself, the careful precision with which she chose her words. She was no ordinary servant, that much was certain, and the more he learned about her, the more his curiosity deepened, twisting together with the strange pull he still could not fully explain. "You have until sunset," he said. "Bring me your proof, Ilara Vane, and perhaps I will finally understand who you truly are." She nodded, turning to leave, but paused at the door. "And if my proof is strong enough to save Callum's life, my king, what will you do about Lord Edmund?" Draven's expression hardened, the warmth from earlier replaced by the cold resolve of a ruler protecting his kingdom. "If your proof is true, Lord Edmund will learn exactly what happens to those who deceive their king. Ilara left the chamber with her heart pounding, though not entirely from fear. Something had shifted between them during that conversation, something neither of them fully understood, yet both of them could feel pulling tighter with every passing hour, drawing them closer to a truth that would change everything within the walls of Blackthorn Castle. The old grain mill stood at the edge of the forest, its wooden walls weathered by years of wind and rain, its great wheel long since stopped turning. It was the kind of place most travelers passed without a second glance, forgotten by time, and abandoned by the miller who once called it home. But for Ilara, it had become something far more important. It was the only place within reach of the castle where she could speak freely, without fear of listening ears. She arrived just after midday, slipping through the trees with practiced silence, her cloak pulled tight against the cool autumn air. Nathaniel was already waiting inside, pacing near a small fire he had built in the corner of the mill's lower floor, his expression tight with worry. "You should not have done it," he said the moment she stepped through the door, touching the king in front of the entire court. "Ilara, they could have executed you on the spot." "They didn't," she said simply, settling onto an old wooden crate near the fire. Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair, still pacing. He was 2 years older than her, though the exile they had endured together had aged him far beyond his years. His face carried the same sharp features as their father, the same intense eyes that had once belonged to a respected nobleman, before false accusations stripped their family of everything they owned. "Callum is innocent," Ilara continued. "You know this as well as I do. If I had said nothing, he would already be dead." "And now the king suspects you of something," Nathaniel said. "You cannot keep pretending to be nothing more than a kitchen servant, Ilara. Not after what you did yesterday." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I know. But I could not stand by and watch another innocent man executed for crimes committed by Lord Edmund's allies. We came here to find proof of his corruption, not to add another death to his list of victims." Nathaniel finally stopped pacing, sitting down across from her, the firelight flickering across his tired face. "Have you found what we need? Proof strong enough to bring him down?" Ilara reached into the folds of her cloak and withdrew a small bundle of papers, carefully wrapped to protect them from the elements. "These are copies of shipment records I found hidden in the archive room. They show weapons and supplies moving through the border checkpoints under false names, checkpoints controlled by men loyal to Lord Edmund." Nathaniel took the papers carefully, scanning through them with narrowed eyes. This could be enough to prove he has been smuggling resources to build support outside the kingdom's borders. But we still need to connect it directly to Callum's arrest. "I found something else," Ilara said quietly. "A letter, half-burned, hidden beneath the floorboards of the records room. It mentions someone needing to be silenced before they could speak too much truth to the wrong ears. I believe it refers to Callum." Nathaniel's eyes widened as he read the fragment of text she handed him next. "If this is genuine, it could be exactly what we need." "It needs to be verified," Ilara said, "and quickly. I promised the king proof by sunset." Nathaniel looked up sharply. "You promised him proof?" "Ilara, if this fails, if Lord Edmund discovers what we are doing before we can act, our family's exile will be the least of our concerns." "I know the risk," she said firmly, "but Callum's life depends on this evidence reaching the king in time, and so does everything we have worked toward these past months. We cannot hesitate now." Nathaniel studied his sister for a long moment, seeing the same fierce determination in her eyes that had carried them through years of hardship since their family had been forced from their home. He nodded slowly, folding the papers carefully back into their protective wrapping. "Then we move quickly," he said. "I will speak with our contact near the southern gate, the one who has been tracking the shipment routes. If he can confirm the details in these records, we will have everything we need." "Be careful," Ilara said. "Lord Edmund has eyes everywhere within these walls. If he suspects we are close to exposing him, he will not hesitate to silence us both." Nathaniel nodded grimly, standing and pulling his cloak tighter around his shoulders. "And you, what will you do until sunset?" Ilara hesitated before answering. "I must return to the castle. The king wishes to speak with me again, and I cannot afford to arouse further suspicion by disappearing for too long." Nathaniel studied her carefully, a flicker of concern passing across his face. "This king, Ilara, are you certain he can be trusted? He is still the same man whose court sentenced our father to exile without a fair trial." "He was misled," Ilara said quietly, "by the very man we are trying to expose." If Lord Edmund fabricated evidence against Callum, it is not difficult to believe he did the same to our father years ago. And if you are wrong about him, Nathaniel pressed, if the king simply pretends to seek justice while secretly protecting the very council members responsible for our family's downfall. Elara did not answer immediately, her mind drifting back to the strange warmth she had felt the moment her hand touched Draven's arm, the flicker of something raw and unguarded she had seen in his eyes before he masked it with the composed authority of a king. She did not fully understand what it meant, but she felt, deep within her, that his shock had been genuine, his hesitation sincere. I do not believe he is like the men who exiled our family, she said finally. But I will not risk everything on faith alone. We gather proof first, Nathaniel. Then we decide how far we can trust him. Nathaniel nodded, satisfied with her answer, though the worry in his eyes remained. Be careful, sister. Whatever this king makes you feel, do not forget why we came here. I have not forgotten, Elara said firmly. Not for a single moment. They parted ways as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Nathaniel disappearing into the forest, toward the southern gate, Elara making her way back toward the castle with the burned letter and shipment records carefully hidden beneath her cloak. As she walked through the winding forest path, her thoughts turned again to the strange bond she had felt with the king, a connection she still could not fully explain. She had heard the old stories about fated mates among the wolves, tales told to children, as bedtime stories meant to give hope of finding a love so powerful it could not be denied. She had never believed such things applied to someone like her, a servant hiding beneath a false identity, carrying secrets that could unravel everything the kingdom believed about its own leadership. Yet the sensation lingered, undeniable and impossible to ignore, growing stronger each time she thought of the king's eyes meeting hers in that quiet chamber, filled with confusion and curiosity in equal measure. She reached the castle gates just as the afternoon sun began casting long shadows across the courtyard, the guards nodding her through without question, unaware of the weight of the papers hidden beneath her cloak, papers that could change the fate of an innocent man, expose a dangerous traitor, and perhaps, though she barely allowed herself to consider it, reveal a truth about herself and the king that neither of them was fully prepared to face. Sunset was approaching quickly, and with it, the moment that would determine not only Callum's fate, but the beginning of a much larger battle for the future of Blackthorn Kingdom. The council chamber felt smaller than usual as the sun began sinking toward the horizon, its golden light spilling through the tall windows and casting long shadows across the polished stone floor. Draven stood near the head of the long table, his arms crossed, watching the door with an intensity that made even the most seasoned guards nearby shift uncomfortably. He had spent the entire day attempting to focus on matters of state, reviewing reports from the Northern Territories, listening to petitions from merchants seeking trade agreements. Yet his mind kept drifting back to the servant girl who had upended his carefully controlled world with nothing more than a single touch and a handful of unanswered questions. He had ordered Osric to quietly investigate her background, though the results had proven frustratingly incomplete. There were records of a young woman named Elara Vane joining the kitchen staff several months earlier, but nothing beyond that. No family history, no prior employment, nothing that explained her sharp intelligence or the confidence with which she had approached him. It was as though she had appeared from nowhere, and the mystery of her origins only deepened his curiosity further. The chamber doors opened, and Elara entered, her posture straight, despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. She carried a small leather satchel pressed tightly against her side, and Draven noted the careful way she scanned the room before stepping fully inside, as though assessing every possible threat before committing to her next move. "You have brought your evidence?" Draven asked, his voice carrying across the quiet chamber. "I have," Elara replied, stepping forward and placing the satchel on the table before him. Lord Edmund, seated near the far end of the table, watched with narrowed eyes as she withdrew the papers, his fingers drumming slowly against the polished wood. Lady Beatrice leaned forward with interest, while Osric stood near the door, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes flicked repeatedly toward Lord Edmund's tightening jaw. Elara laid out the shipment records first, explaining in careful detail how the documents showed weapons and supplies moving through checkpoints under falsified names, checkpoints that fell under Lord Edmund's direct authority. These records could belong to any number of smuggling operations, Lord Edmund said dismissively, though his voice carried a slight edge that had not been present earlier. Servants are not typically trained to interpret official shipment documentation. Perhaps you are mistaken in your understanding of these records. Perhaps, Elara said calmly, which is why I brought additional confirmation. She withdrew the burned letter fragment next, placing it carefully on the table. Draven leaned forward, studying the charred edges and the faint remaining words visible on the parchment. This letter references someone who needed to be silenced before they could reveal too much truth, Elara continued. I believe it refers directly to Callum Briar, and I believe it was written under Lord Edmund's authority. The chamber fell silent. Lord Edmund's face had grown noticeably paler, though he quickly composed himself, forcing a tight smile onto his thin lips. This is nothing more than a fragment, he said. It proves nothing. Anyone could have written such words. About anyone. That is true, Elara admitted, which is why I sought additional confirmation from a contact near the southern gate, someone who has tracked these shipment routes for several months. The chamber doors opened once more, and Nathaniel entered, his expression grim but resolute. Draven's eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of the young man, recognizing something familiar in his sharp features, though he could not immediately place where he had seen such a resemblance before. This is my brother, Elara said simply. He has confirmed the shipment routes align precisely with the falsified records, routes that lead directly to warehouses controlled by men loyal to Lord Edmund. Lord Edmund rose from his seat sharply, his composure finally cracking beneath the weight of mounting evidence. This is absurd. You expect the king to believe wild accusations from a servant and her unknown companion, over the word of a trusted council member who has served this kingdom faithfully for over a decade? I expect the king to examine the evidence honestly, Elara replied, her voice remaining steady, despite the tension crackling through the room. And to remember that a decade of service does not erase the possibility of betrayal. Draven studied the documents carefully, his sharp mind piecing together the details with the same precision he applied to matters of war and governance. The shipment records were detailed and consistent. The burned letter, though incomplete, carried a tone and phrasing that matched documents he had seen before from Lord Edmund's own correspondence. Osric, Draven said finally, his voice carrying the weight of command. Send guards to search Lord Edmund's private chambers, and the warehouses mentioned in these shipment records immediately. You cannot be serious, Lord Edmund said, his voice rising with barely concealed panic. My king, surely you do not intend to act on the word of a kitchen servant and her mysterious brother. I intend to seek the truth, Draven said coldly, turning to face the councilman directly. If you are innocent, Lord Edmund, the search will confirm it, and these accusations will be dismissed. But if you are hiding something, it is far better that we discover it now, rather than allow another innocent man to lose his life for your crimes. Lord Edmund's face twisted with fury, though he quickly forced his expression back into a mask of calm indignation. Very well. Search my chambers if you must. You will find nothing but loyalty to this crown. Osric nodded and departed swiftly with a group of guards, leaving the chamber in tense silence as they awaited the results of the search. Draven turned his attention back to Elara and Nathaniel, studying them both with careful curiosity. You have taken great risks to bring this evidence forward, he said. Risks that could have easily cost you your lives had I chosen not to listen. We had no other choice, Nathaniel said firmly. Justice within these walls has failed innocent people before, my king. We could not allow it to fail again. Draven's eyes narrowed slightly at the weight behind those words, sensing there was far more history between this family and his kingdom than had yet been revealed. But before he could press further, the chamber doors burst open once more, and Osric returned, his expression grim, carrying a heavy chest filled with documents and hidden correspondence discovered within Lord Edmund's private study. My king, Osric said, setting the chest down before the table. We found everything. Records of smuggled weapons, correspondence detailing plans to weaken the kingdom's northern defenses, and evidence connecting Lord Edmund directly to the false charges brought against Callum Briar. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Lord Edmund's face drained of all color as the guards surrounded him, awaiting the king's command. Lord Edmund Castellan, Draven said, his voice cold and final. You are hereby stripped of your council position and placed under arrest, pending full investigation into your crimes against this kingdom. Lord Edmund's composure finally shattered completely, his voice rising into desperate protests as the guards seized his arms and led him from the chamber. The remaining council members watched in shocked silence, the weight of the sudden revelation settling heavily over the room. Once the chamber had cleared, Draven turned to Alara and Nathaniel, his expression softer than it had been throughout the entire proceeding. Callum Briar will be released immediately, and his name cleared of all charges. You have both done this kingdom a great service today. Thank you, my king, Alara said quietly, relief washing visibly across her tired features. Draven studied her for a long moment, the strange pull he had felt since their first encounter, growing steadily stronger, despite his attempts to ignore it. There is still much I do not understand about you, Alara Vane. About your family, your past, and the connection I feel whenever you are near. Alara met his gaze steadily, though her heart pounded fiercely beneath her calm exterior. Then perhaps, my king, it is time I told you the truth. The private chamber felt different this time when Alara stepped inside, the fire burning low, the shadows stretching long across the shelves of old books. Draven stood near the window, his back to her, watching the last colors of sunset fade over the castle walls. Nathaniel waited outside at Draven's request, though Alara could feel her brother's tension, even through the closed door. You said you would tell me the truth, Draven said without turning around. I am listening. Alara took a steadying breath. My family did not always live in exile. Years ago, my father served as a trusted advisor to your own father. Before you took the throne, he was accused of treason, stripped of his lands and title, and cast out of the kingdom with his wife and 2 children. We were forced to survive in hidden villages, always moving, always afraid someone would recognize us. Draven turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Your father's name? Edric Vane, Alara said quietly. Recognition flickered across Draven's face, though he said nothing at first, his mind clearly working through old memories. I remember the name. My father spoke of him rarely, and always with regret in his voice, though he never explained why. Because your father was manipulated, Alara said, by the same man responsible for framing Callum Briar. Lord Edmund fabricated evidence against my father years ago, convincing your father that he was plotting against the crown. We lost everything because of his lies. Draven's jaw tightened, the weight of this revelation settling heavily over him. And you came here, to this castle, seeking revenge? I came seeking the truth, Alara said firmly, and justice, for my family, and for anyone else Lord Edmund has harmed over the years. I did not expect to find myself standing before the king, who could have easily dismissed everything I discovered without a second thought. Draven studied her closely, seeing now the full weight of everything she had risked, not only for Callum, but for her own family's long overdue justice. You could have simply approached me directly, told me your story from the beginning. Why choose to hide among the servants instead? Because trust is not given easily to the daughter of an exiled traitor, Alara said. I needed proof before I could risk revealing myself. Proof strong enough to withstand scrutiny. Proof that could not simply be dismissed as bitterness or revenge. Draven nodded slowly, understanding the careful logic behind her caution, even as something warmer stirred within him at the depth of her courage. You have more than proven yourself today, Alara. Your father's name will be cleared, and whatever lands and titles were unjustly stripped from your family will be restored. Alara's eyes widened slightly, emotion breaking through her carefully controlled composure for the first time. You would do that, after everything that has happened? Injustice within my kingdom is my responsibility to correct, Draven said, whether it occurred under my rule or my father's. I will not allow Lord Edmund's lies to continue harming innocent families. Alara felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, though she blinked them back quickly, unwilling to appear weak before the king who had just offered to undo years of suffering with a single decision. Thank you, my king. I do not have words enough to express what this means to my family. Draven stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking, until she could feel the warmth radiating from him, the same strange pull she had felt since their first encounter growing stronger with every passing moment. There is something else we must discuss, Alara, something neither of us can continue ignoring. She knew immediately what he meant, her heart pounding as she met his gaze steadily, the connection between us. Yes, Draven said quietly. I have felt it since the moment your hand touched my arm in that hall. My wolf recognized something in you that I cannot explain through logic alone. I have felt it too, Alara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. though I do not fully understand what it means. Among wolves, there are stories, Draven said carefully, of fated bonds between two souls, connections that cannot be forced or denied once they awaken. I never believed such bonds could exist for someone like me, hardened by years of rule and loss. Yet everything about this feels undeniably real. Elara studied his face, seeing beneath the composed authority of the king to something far more vulnerable underneath. A man who had clearly built walls around his heart, just as carefully as she had built her own disguise. What do we do with such a connection, my king? I came here for justice, not for anything more. Perhaps justice and something more are not mutually exclusive, Draven said, reaching out slowly to take her hand, testing whether she would pull away. She did not. The moment their fingers intertwined, the same warmth from before surged through them both, stronger this time, undeniable, a current that seemed to hum beneath their skin, like the beginning of something neither of them could fully control. I propose an alliance, Draven said, his voice steadying, despite the intensity of the moment. You clearly possess skills of investigation and observation, far beyond what most within this castle could offer. Lord Edmund's arrest has exposed only the surface of a much larger network of corruption within my council. I need someone I can trust to help uncover the rest, someone who has already proven their loyalty to true justice, rather than blind obedience to power. And in exchange? Elara asked, though she already suspected the answer. In exchange, I offer my protection, Draven said. For you and your family. No noble within these walls will move against you while you stand under my authority. And I will personally ensure Lord Edmund's remaining allies are exposed, before they can retaliate against those who brought him down. Elara considered his offer carefully, weighing the risks against the opportunity being presented. She had come to this castle seeking justice for her family, and now that justice was being offered freely, along with an opportunity to complete the mission she had begun months ago. Yet accepting his offer meant remaining close to a man whose presence stirred emotions she had not prepared herself to face. I accept, she said finally, but I must insist on being treated as a true partner in this investigation, not merely a servant carrying out orders. Draven's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, the first genuine expression of warmth she had seen from him since their first encounter. You have already proven you are far more than a servant, Elara Vane. I would expect nothing less than full partnership from someone as capable as you. Their hands remained joined a moment longer than necessary, both of them acutely aware of the current still humming between them, before Elara finally stepped back, needing distance to gather her thoughts. There is still much work to be done, she said. Lord Edmund did not act alone. If his network extends as far as I suspect, we will need to move carefully to avoid alerting his remaining allies before we can expose them. Agreed, Draven said, his expression shifting back into the focused determination of a ruler preparing for battle. Tomorrow, we begin reviewing every document recovered from his chambers. Whatever secrets remain hidden within this castle, we will find them together. As Elara left the private chamber that evening, her mind raced with the weight of everything that had changed within a single day. Her family's name would be cleared. Justice, long delayed, was finally within reach. And somewhere beneath the careful walls she had built to protect her mission, something unexpected had begun to grow. A connection to the very king she had once viewed with cautious suspicion, now transforming into something neither of them fully understood, yet both were beginning to embrace. Outside the castle walls, however, in the shadows of a hidden meeting place, known only to a select few, whispers of Lord Edmund's arrest had already begun to spread among those who had once served his ambitions in secret. And among those whispers, a new plan was already taking shape, one that would soon threaten everything Elara and Draven had just begun to build together. The following days passed in a blur of documents, hidden ledgers, and careful questioning. Elara and Draven worked closely together in the private chamber, poring over the contents of the chest recovered from Lord Edmund's study, cross-referencing names, dates, and shipment routes, with records from the Royal Archive. Nathaniel joined them frequently, his knowledge of the southern trade routes proving invaluable in confirming which warehouses and checkpoints had been compromised. What they discovered was more troubling than any of them had anticipated. Lord Edmund had not acted alone. His correspondence revealed a network extending far beyond the castle walls, connecting him to several minor nobles, a handful of corrupt merchants, and at least 2 other members of the Royal Council, who had quietly benefited from his smuggling operations over the years. "This goes deeper than we thought," Nathaniel said one evening, spreading a series of letters across the table. "Lady Beatrice's name appears here, though only in passing. We cannot be certain if she was complicit or simply unaware." Draven studied the letter carefully, his expression grim. "Beatrice has served this council longer than any other member. If she has been compromised, it changes everything about who I can trust within these walls. We need more proof before making any accusations," Elara said firmly. "A single mention in a letter is not enough to condemn someone, especially someone with as much influence as Lady Beatrice holds." Draven nodded, though the weight of suspicion clearly troubled him. Ruling a kingdom required trust, yet every day seemed to reveal another crack in the foundation he had built his reign upon. As the investigation deepened, so too did the whispers spreading through the castle. Servants spoke quietly of Elara's growing closeness to the king, some with admiration, others with suspicion. Nobles who had once ignored her presence now watched with calculating eyes, sensing a shift in the balance of power within the court. One evening, as Elara made her way back to the servants' quarters after a long day of reviewing documents, she noticed a figure lingering near the shadows of the corridor, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with unease. She quickened her pace, slipping into a side hallway to avoid direct confrontation, but the figure followed at a careful distance. She reached her small room and closed the door quickly, her heart pounding as she pressed her ear against the wood, listening for footsteps outside. After several tense moments of silence, she finally allowed herself to relax, though the unease lingered long into the night. The following morning, she mentioned the incident to Draven during their usual meeting in the private chamber. "You were followed?" he asked, his expression darkening with concern. "Did you recognize the person?" "No," Elara admitted. "The corridor was too dim, and I did not wish to risk a confrontation alone." "From now on, you will not walk these halls without an escort," Draven said firmly. "Lord Edmund's allies know their network is under threat. If they suspect you are the one responsible for exposing them, they will not hesitate to eliminate that threat." "I do not need protection," Elara said, though her voice carried less conviction than she intended. "You need caution," Draven corrected gently. "There is a difference. I have already lost too many people to the ambitions of corrupt men within this court. I will not lose you as well." The intensity in his eyes as he spoke those words sent a warm shiver through her chest, the same undeniable pull growing stronger with every passing day they spent working closely together. She nodded, accepting his concern without further protest. That afternoon, Osric assigned 2 trusted guards to discreetly watch over Elara whenever she moved through the castle, a precaution that proved wise sooner than any of them expected. 2 nights later, as she made her way from the archive room back toward her quarters, a hooded figure emerged suddenly from a side passage, moving with clear intent toward her. Before Elara could react, one of her assigned guards intercepted the attacker, wrestling him to the ground, while the second guard called out an alarm that echoed through the corridor. Within moments, additional guards arrived, securing the attacker and dragging him away for questioning, while Elara stood frozen against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the adrenaline of the near miss finally caught up with her. Draven arrived within minutes, having heard the commotion from his nearby chamber, his expression a mixture of fury and fear as he rushed to her side. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, his hands gently checking her arms and shoulders for any sign of injury. "I am fine," Elara said, though her voice trembled slightly. "Your guards reacted quickly enough." Draven's jaw tightened with barely contained anger. "This confirms our suspicions. Lord Edmund's allies know we are close to exposing them, and they are willing to eliminate anyone who threatens their remaining influence." The captured attacker, when questioned extensively by Osric, revealed under careful interrogation that he had been hired anonymously through a series of intermediaries, paid handsomely to eliminate a servant girl who had been asking too many questions. He knew nothing of who had ultimately ordered the attack, only that the payment had come from someone with clear connections to the remaining council members implicated in Lord Edmund's network. "We are close," Draven said later that evening, as he and Elara sat together in the quiet private chamber, the earlier tension slowly fading into exhausted relief. "Whoever ordered this attack is afraid of what we might discover next. Then we must move faster," Elara said, "before they have the chance to try again." Draven reached out, taking her hand gently in his, the warmth between them settling into something steadier, more certain than the confusion that had marked their earlier encounters. I cannot lose you now, Ilara. Not after everything we have uncovered together, and not after everything I have come to feel for you these past days. Ilara's breath caught at the raw honesty in his voice, the careful walls he had built around his heart, clearly beginning to crumble in her presence. I feel it too, she admitted softly. This connection between us, I no longer wish to deny it. Draven lifted her hand gently, pressing a soft kiss against her knuckles, the gesture simple, yet filled with a tenderness that spoke louder than any words could express. Then let us finish what we started, together. Expose the remaining traitors within my court, and build something real between us, once this danger has finally passed. Ilara nodded, her heart swelling, with a mixture of determination and hope she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Whatever challenges remained ahead, she no longer felt as though she faced them alone, and for the first time since her family's exile began, she allowed herself to imagine a future built not on survival alone, but on justice, partnership, and perhaps something far deeper than either of them had expected to find within the walls of Blackthorn Castle. Yet even as hope grew between them, the true architect behind the recent attack remained hidden in the shadows, watching from a distance, already planning a far more dangerous move against the king and the servant girl who had upended their carefully constructed plans. The days following the attack passed with heightened caution throughout the castle. Guards doubled their patrols along the corridors, and Osric personally oversaw the questioning of anyone connected to the hired attacker, hoping to trace the payment back to its true source. Yet whoever had orchestrated the attempt had covered their tracks with careful precision, leaving only fragments of information that led nowhere definitive. Ilara continued working closely with Draven each day, though now she moved through the castle with 2 guards trailing discreetly behind her at all times. The arrangement felt suffocating at first, a constant reminder of the danger surrounding her, but she gradually accepted it as a necessary precaution rather than an insult to her capability. One afternoon, while reviewing a fresh batch of correspondence recovered from a warehouse linked to Lord Edmund's network, Ilara noticed a pattern that made her pulse quicken with sudden recognition. "Draven," she said, spreading several letters across the table before him. "Look at the seal on these documents. It matches the seal used on correspondence from Lady Beatrice's private estate." Draven leaned forward, studying the wax impressions carefully. This could simply mean her seal was stolen or forged. "Perhaps," Ilara said, "but combine this with her name appearing in Lord Edmund's earlier letters, and the pattern becomes difficult to dismiss as coincidence." Before Draven could respond, a sharp knock interrupted their conversation. Osric entered quickly, his expression tense. "My king, there has been an incident in the eastern courtyard. Guards discovered signs of someone attempting to access the royal treasury through a hidden passage, known only to a select few within the council." Draven rose immediately, his expression hardening into focused determination. "Who knew of this passage?" "Only members of the royal council," Osric said grimly, "and yourself, my king." The implication hung heavy in the air. Draven turned to Ilara, his eyes reflecting the same suspicion, now solidifying in both their minds. "Summon Lady Beatrice to the council chamber, immediately." Within the hour, Lady Beatrice stood before them, her composure carefully maintained despite the tension evident in the room. "You summoned me, my king. We have found evidence connecting your seal to correspondence within Lord Edmund's network," Draven said directly, watching her reaction closely. "And someone attempted to access the treasury through a passage known only to council members shortly after this evidence came to light." Lady Beatrice's expression flickered, a brief moment of panic quickly masked by practiced composure. "My king, surely you do not believe I would betray this crown after decades of loyal service. Then explain the seal," Ilara said firmly, stepping forward, "and explain why your name appears repeatedly throughout Lord Edmund's private correspondence." Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed with sudden hostility as she turned toward Ilara. "You dare question my loyalty, servant girl? You, who arrived within these walls only months ago, hiding behind a false identity, while manipulating the king's judgment for your own hidden purposes?" "Answer the question, Beatrice," Draven said, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. For a long moment, Lady Beatrice remained silent, her carefully constructed composure finally beginning to crack under the pressure of the mounting evidence. Then, with a sudden and unexpected motion, She reached into the folds of her robe, withdrawing a small vial that she hurled toward the floor near Draven's feet. Thick smoke erupted instantly, filling the chamber with a choking haze that sent guards scrambling in confusion. Alara grabbed Draven's arm, pulling him back from the worst of the smoke as Lady Beatrice used the chaos to bolt toward the chamber doors, her earlier composure completely abandoned in her desperate bid to escape. "Stop her!" Draven shouted, his voice cutting through the confusion, as guards rushed to comply. The chase led through the winding corridors of the castle, guards pursuing Lady Beatrice as she moved with surprising speed for a woman of her age, clearly having planned an escape route in advance, should her involvement ever be discovered. Alara followed closely behind Draven, her heart pounding, as they navigated the confusing passages toward the eastern courtyard, where Beatrice seemed to be heading. They emerged into the courtyard just as Lady Beatrice reached a hidden gate along the castle's outer wall, her hand already on the mechanism that would allow her escape into the surrounding forest. Draven's wolf surged forward instinctively, his speed increasing dramatically, as primal instinct took over from careful royal composure. He reached her just as the gate began to swing open, seizing her arm with a grip that left no room for further resistance. "Your escape ends here, Beatrice." She struggled briefly against his hold, before finally sagging in defeat, the fight draining from her as guards surrounded them both, securing her properly under careful watch. "You have no idea what you have uncovered," Lady Beatrice spat bitterly as guards led her away. "This goes far beyond Lord Edmund's ambitions, my king. There are others within this kingdom who will not rest until their plans are fulfilled, regardless of what happens to me." Her words sent a chill through Alara's chest, as she watched the guards escort the disgraced councilwoman toward the dungeons. Draven turned to her, his expression grim, despite the successful capture. "She is right to be afraid," he said quietly. "If her words are true, we have only uncovered a fraction of the true threat facing this kingdom." That evening, as guards thoroughly searched Lady Beatrice's private chambers, they discovered a hidden ledger, detailing an extensive network of corruption, reaching far beyond what Lord Edmund's documents had revealed. Names of nobles from neighboring territories appeared alongside detailed plans, referencing something referred to only as the Gathering, a mysterious event scheduled to take place within the coming weeks. "What is the Gathering?" Alara asked, studying the cryptic references scattered throughout the ledger's pages. Draven's expression darkened as he read through the documents carefully. "I believe it refers to a planned uprising, coordinated among several corrupt nobles seeking to overthrow my rule and install a puppet leader more sympathetic to their ambitions." "An uprising," Alara repeated, her stomach tightening with dread. "How soon?" "The ledger suggests within the next fortnight," Draven said grimly. "We must move quickly to identify every name involved before they have the chance to act." As they worked late into the night, cross-referencing names from the ledger with known nobles throughout the kingdom, the weight of the coming threat settled heavily over them both. What had begun as a single act of defiance to save an innocent man's life had unfolded into a battle far larger than either of them had anticipated, threatening not only their growing connection, but the very foundation of the kingdom Draven had sworn to protect. Yet even amid the mounting danger, Alara found herself drawing strength from Draven's steady presence beside her, and she knew, with growing certainty, that whatever battle lay ahead, they would face it together, bound not only by fate, but by a shared determination to see true justice finally restored within the walls of Blackthorn. Word of Lady Beatrice's betrayal spread quickly through the castle, though Draven kept the details of the ledger and the planned uprising strictly confined to those he trusted most, fearing that wider knowledge might alert the remaining conspirators before preparations could be made. Osric worked tirelessly alongside a small group of loyal guards, quietly identifying which nobles named in the ledger still held positions of influence within the kingdom. Alara spent long hours in the private chamber, cross-referencing dates and locations mentioned throughout Lady Beatrice's hidden documents, searching for any clue that might reveal exactly when and where the gathering was planned to take place. Nathaniel assisted as well, using his knowledge of the southern territories to identify likely meeting points along the border, where such a gathering of conspirators might occur undetected. "Here," Alara said one evening, pointing to a series of coded references scattered throughout the ledger's final pages. "These symbols repeat consistently alongside references to the old fortress near Ravenswood. I believe the gathering is planned to take place there." Draven studied the location on a map spread across the table. Ravenswood Fortress was abandoned decades ago, following a dispute between my grandfather and the noble family who once controlled that territory. It would make an ideal location for a secret uprising, isolated and largely forgotten. We have perhaps 10 days before the planned date, Nathaniel said, calculating carefully from the coded references. If we move swiftly, we can prepare a proper response before they gather their full strength. Draven nodded, already formulating the beginnings of a strategy. We will need to gather loyal forces quietly, without alerting suspicion. If word reaches the conspirators that we know of their plans, they may change location or accelerate their timeline. As the days passed, tension within the castle grew steadily, though Elara and Draven worked to maintain an appearance of normalcy, to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Yet even as they focused on preparing for the coming conflict, the connection between them continued deepening, with each passing hour spent working closely side by side. One evening, as they reviewed the final preparations for their planned approach to Ravenswood, a sudden commotion erupted outside the private chamber. Shouts echoed through the corridor, followed by the sound of clashing steel. Draven rose immediately, positioning himself protectively between Elara and the door just as it burst open, revealing two hooded figures who had somehow slipped past the castle's outer guards. The attackers moved with clear intent, one lunging directly toward Elara, while the other engaged Draven in a fierce exchange near the doorway. Draven's wolf surged forward instinctively, his movements becoming swift and precise as years of training took over, disarming his attacker within moments and forcing him back against the wall. But the second attacker had already closed the distance toward Elara, his blade raised in a swift arc. She barely managed to twist aside, the blade grazing across her shoulder as she stumbled backward, pain flaring sharply through her arm. Draven's reaction was instantaneous and primal. A deep, guttural sound tore from his throat as his wolf took complete control, closing the distance between himself and Elara's attacker with impossible speed. The confrontation ended swiftly, the attacker subdued and restrained before he could strike a second time. Draven rushed to Elara's side, his hands gentle despite the fierce protectiveness still radiating from him. "Elara, are you hurt badly?" "It is only a graze," she said, though her voice trembled slightly from the shock of the sudden attack. As Draven carefully examined the wound on her shoulder, both of them noticed something unexpected. Where his fingers brushed gently against her skin near the injury, a faint mark had begun to form, delicate and intricate, resembling the shape of intertwined wolves circling one another in an endless embrace. "What is this?" Elara asked softly, staring at the mark with a mixture of wonder and confusion. Draven's breath caught, as understanding dawned across his features. "It is the mark of a true mate bond. I have only read of such things in old texts, passed down through generations of our kind. It appears when the bond between two fated souls is finally acknowledged and accepted by both parties." Elara stared at the mark, tracing its delicate lines with trembling fingers, the reality of the connection between them finally solidifying beyond any possible doubt. "Then this is real. Everything we have felt since that first moment in the throne room. It has always been real," Draven said softly, his eyes filled with an emotion far gentler than the fierce protectiveness that had driven him only moments before. "I simply refused to believe fate could offer me something so precious after everything I had lost in the past." Elara reached up, gently touching the side of his face, feeling the warmth of the bond settling deeply between them, undeniable now, in ways that transcended simple attraction or growing affection. "Then let us face whatever comes next together, as true partners bound not only by circumstance, but by fate itself." Draven pressed a gentle kiss against her forehead, the tenderness of the gesture a stark contrast to the danger that had surrounded them only moments before. "The attack tonight confirms our enemies grow desperate. They know we are close to uncovering the full extent of their plans, and they will not hesitate to strike again before we can act." As guards secured the captured attacker for questioning, Draven turned his attention back to Elara's wound, carefully bandaging the graze while his mind worked through the implications of the night's events. The mark between them now served as undeniable proof of their bond, yet it also marked her as an even greater target for those seeking to destroy everything Draven had worked to protect. "We move against Ravenswood sooner than planned," Draven said finally, his voice hardening with renewed determination. "Whatever remains of Lord Edmund and Lady Beatrice's network, we end it before they have the chance to harm anyone else within these walls." Elara nodded firmly, the pain in her shoulder fading beneath the fierce resolve now burning steadily within her. Then let us finish what we started, together, and ensure that no one else suffers the injustice my family once endured. As they prepared for the coming confrontation, the bond between them settled into something unshakable, a foundation strong enough to withstand whatever dangers still lay ahead in the battle for the future of Blackthorn Kingdom. The journey toward Ravenswood took 3 days, Draven leading a carefully selected group of loyal soldiers through the forest paths that bordered the kingdom's southern territories. Elara rode alongside Nathaniel, her shoulder healing steadily beneath careful bandages, though the fresh mark upon her skin remained a constant reminder of everything that now bound her to the king riding at the front of their small procession. Osric had remained behind at the castle, tasked with maintaining order and watching for any sign of remaining conspirators who might attempt further disruption, while Draven led the confrontation against those gathered at the old fortress. The plan was simple in concept, though dangerous in execution. They would arrive under cover of darkness, surround the fortress before the conspirators could organize an effective defense, and force a surrender before violence became necessary. As they approached the outskirts of Ravenswood on the 3rd evening, Nathaniel's scouts returned with troubling news. "Their numbers are greater than the ledger suggested," one scout reported. "At least 30 armed men have gathered within the fortress walls, along with several nobles we recognized from neighboring territories." Draven's expression hardened as he absorbed the report. "Then we adjust our approach. Elara, you and Nathaniel will remain with the rear guard until the fortress gates are secured." "Absolutely not," Elara said firmly. "I did not come this far to remain safely hidden while you face this danger alone." "Elara, I have faced danger since the moment I stepped into your throne room," she interrupted, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. "I will not abandon this fight now, when we are so close to finally securing justice for everyone harmed by this conspiracy." Draven studied her for a long moment, recognizing the same fierce resolve that had first caught his attention months ago, now burning brighter than ever within her determined gaze. "Stay close to me then. Whatever happens tonight, I will not lose you." As darkness fell fully over the forest surrounding Ravenswood, Draven's forces moved into position, surrounding the ancient fortress walls with careful precision. Torches flickered from within, illuminating shadows of armed figures moving along the fortress battlements, unaware of the approaching threat until it was nearly too late. The confrontation began swiftly once Draven's forces breached the outer gates, guards clashing against the conspirators' hastily organized defense. Draven fought with the ferocity of a king protecting everything he held dear, his wolf lending him strength and speed that overwhelmed those who dared stand against him. Elara remained close behind, using the knowledge of pressure points and vulnerable areas she had learned through years of necessity during her family's exile, disarming opponents rather than causing lasting harm whenever possible, focused on ending the conflict swiftly, rather than prolonging unnecessary suffering. As the battle progressed, a familiar figure emerged from within the fortress, flanked by several remaining loyal guards. Lord Edmund, having somehow escaped his confinement within the castle dungeons through the assistance of allies still loyal to his cause, stood at the heart of the conspiracy, his expression twisted with desperate fury at the sight of the king he had sought to overthrow. "You should have died in that dungeon," Draven said coldly, advancing toward his former advisor with measured steps. "And you should have died years ago, when your father still held control over this kingdom," Lord Edmund spat back. "I have spent decades building alliances strong enough to finally seize the power that rightfully belongs to those with the vision to lead this kingdom properly. Your vision led only to corruption and betrayal," Draven said. "Justice will finally be served tonight, Edmund, one way or another." Lord Edmund lunged forward with surprising speed, a hidden blade appearing in his hand as he attempted a desperate final strike. Draven parried the attack easily, his wolf granting him reflexes far superior to his former advisors, disarming him within moments and forcing him to the ground beneath a firm and unyielding grip. As the remaining conspirators witnessed their leader's swift defeat, resistance crumbled quickly throughout the fortress. Guards loyal to Draven moved efficiently to secure the surrendering nobles and soldiers, ending the confrontation with minimal further conflict. Amid the chaos, however, one of Lord Edmund's remaining allies, recognizing the battle was lost, turned his attention toward Elara instead, seeking a final act of vengeance against the woman responsible for exposing their entire network. He moved swiftly through the confusion, his blade raised toward her unprotected side. "Ilara," Nathaniel's warning came just in time, though not quite fast enough to fully prevent the attack. Draven, his senses heightened by the fierce protectiveness of the mate bond now fully awakened within him, sensed the danger a mere heartbeat before it struck. He moved with impossible speed, placing himself between Ilara and the incoming blade, taking the strike meant for her across his own forearm. The wound was shallow, though the sight of blood against his skin sent a surge of fury through Ilara that momentarily overwhelmed her careful composure. She moved swiftly, disarming the attacker with practiced precision before he could strike again, guards quickly moving to secure him under restraint. "You are hurt," she said urgently, examining the cut along Draven's arm with trembling hands. "It is nothing compared to what could have happened to you," Draven said, his voice rough with the intensity of emotion still coursing through him. "I would rather bear 1,000 wounds than see harm come to you, Ilara." As the last of the resistance within Ravenswood Fortress finally crumbled, guards moved swiftly to secure every conspirator, including Lord Edmund himself, who was bound securely and prepared for transport back to the castle to face full justice for his crimes. Draven allowed Ilara to properly bandage his wound as the fortress was thoroughly searched, revealing additional evidence confirming the full extent of the conspiracy that had threatened to tear apart the kingdom's carefully maintained peace. Names of nobles from across multiple territories were uncovered, ensuring that justice would extend far beyond the walls of Blackthorn itself. As dawn broke over the forest surrounding Ravenswood, illuminating the aftermath of the confrontation, Draven turned to Ilara, exhaustion evident in his features, though relief and determination burned steadily beneath the surface. "It is over. The conspiracy has finally been fully exposed and dismantled." Ilara nodded, relief washing over her as the weight of months of careful investigation and danger finally began to lift from her shoulders. "Your kingdom is safe now, Draven, and my family's name will finally be restored." "Our kingdom," Draven corrected gently, taking her hand in his, despite the bandages wrapped around his forearm, "for I intend to ensure you stand beside me, not merely as an ally in this fight, but as my queen, for as long as fate allows us to remain bound together." As the procession prepared for the journey back toward Blackthorn Castle, carrying with them the captured conspirators, and the promise of justice finally restored, Ilara felt a deep and steady sense of peace settle over her, knowing that whatever challenges still remained ahead, she would face them standing firmly beside the man fate had chosen for her, in a partnership built not only on love, but on shared conviction and unwavering courage. The journey back to Blackthorn Castle took 3 full days, the captured conspirators secured under heavy guard, their fate already sealed by the overwhelming evidence gathered against them. Word of the successful confrontation at Ravenswood traveled swiftly ahead of the returning procession, and by the time they approached the castle gates, crowds had already begun gathering along the roadside, eager to catch a glimpse of the king, who had personally led the effort to dismantle a conspiracy threatening the entire kingdom. Osric greeted them at the castle gates, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering concern, as he took in the sight of Draven's bandaged arm and Ilara's healing shoulder. "The castle has remained secure in your absence, my king. Callum Briar has fully recovered and awaits your return, along with several others eager to express their gratitude for the justice finally restored." Draven nodded, exhaustion evident beneath his composed exterior, though a quiet satisfaction had settled over him that had been absent for years prior to Ilara's arrival within his court. "Prepare the council chamber. We will address the full extent of the conspiracy and ensure proper justice is carried out for everyone involved." Over the following days, the captured conspirators faced careful questioning, their testimonies confirming the full scope of the network that Lord Edmund and Lady Beatrice had built over many years. Nobles from neighboring territories who had participated in the planned uprising were stripped of their titles and lands, their punishments carried out with fairness, tempered by Draven's insistence on avoiding unnecessary cruelty. Lord Edmund himself faced the full weight of justice for his crimes, his sentence determined only after careful deliberation among the Reformed Council, which now included several new members, chosen specifically for their integrity and loyalty to true justice rather than personal ambition. Ilara's father, Edric Vane, was summoned back from the distant village where the family had settled during their exile, arriving at the castle several weeks later to witness the formal restoration of his name, lands, and title. The reunion between Ilara and her parents who had endured years of uncertainty regarding their children's whereabouts and safety, brought tears of joy that finally washed away years of accumulated grief and hardship. "You have done what I never believed possible," Edric said to his daughter, embracing her tightly within the halls of the very castle that had once cast their family into exile. "You have restored our honor and brought justice to those who wronged us." "I could not have done it alone," Elara said, glancing toward Draven, who stood nearby, watching the reunion with quiet warmth in his expression. The king believed in the truth, even when it meant confronting uncomfortable realities about his own council. As the weeks passed, life within Blackthorn Castle slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, though the bond between Elara and Draven continued deepening with each passing day. The mark upon her shoulder had fully healed, leaving behind the delicate intertwined pattern that now served as a permanent symbol of the connection fate had woven between them. One evening, several months after the events at Ravenswood, Draven called for a formal gathering within the Great Hall, the same chamber where Elara had once stopped an execution with nothing more than a single touch. Nobles, guards, and servants alike gathered within the hall, curious about the announcement their king had promised to share. Draven stood before the assembled crowd, Elara beside him, her posture confident and unwavering, despite the weight of every eye fixed upon her. "Many of you remember the day a servant girl stepped forward to challenge my judgment, risking her own life to prevent an injustice from being carried out within these very walls." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, memories of that fateful day still fresh within the collective memory of the court. "What many of you do not know," Draven continued, "is that this woman, Elara Vane, is the daughter of Edric Vane, a nobleman wrongfully exiled years ago, through the same corruption we have since exposed and dismantled. Her courage that day was not simply the act of a brave servant, but the beginning of a journey that has restored justice not only to her family, but to countless others harmed by the same conspiracy." The hall fell silent as Draven turned to face Elara directly, taking her hand gently in his before the entire assembled court. "Fate bound us together the moment her hand touched mine, a connection I resisted at first, unable to believe such a bond could exist for someone who had long since closed his heart to such possibilities. But Elara Vane has proven herself not only as my fated mate, but as a partner worthy of standing beside the throne, someone whose courage, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to justice have strengthened this kingdom beyond measure." He turned back toward the assembled crowd, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "It is with great honor that I announce Elara Vane as my chosen mate and future queen of Blackthorn." The hall remained silent for a long moment, the weight of the announcement settling over the crowd, before a slow wave of applause began building throughout the chamber. Nobles and servants alike recognizing the profound justice and symmetry in the moment unfolding before them. The very woman who had once stood as an unknown servant, defying every expectation to save an innocent life, now stood transformed, acknowledged before the entire kingdom as the future queen who would stand beside their king. Elara felt tears of joy threatening at the corners of her eyes as she looked out over the crowd, remembering the fear and uncertainty that had once driven her to step forward that fateful day, uncertain whether her actions would lead to justice or her own destruction. Now, standing beside Draven with the weight of the entire kingdom's approval settling around her, she understood that fate had guided her toward exactly the path she had been meant to walk. "Together," Draven said, his voice filled with quiet conviction as he addressed the assembled court, "we will ensure that justice remains the foundation of this kingdom, and that no innocent voice will ever again be silenced by corruption or fear." As the great hall erupted into genuine celebration, the same chamber that had once witnessed the tension of an execution order now echoed with joy and hope for the future. Callum Briar, fully recovered and restored to his rightful place within the kingdom, stood among the crowd, watching with quiet gratitude as the woman who had saved his life stood transformed before the entire court. Nathaniel and Edric Vane watched from nearby, pride evident in their expressions as they witnessed the culmination of everything their family had endured and ultimately overcome. Osric stood near the throne, a rare smile breaking across his usually stern features as he observed the peace finally settling over the kingdom he had served faithfully for so many years. And at the center of it all stood Draven and Elara, bound together not only by fate, but by a shared commitment to justice, courage, and love that had transformed a moment of desperate defiance into the beginning of a new era, for the kingdom of Blackthorn, one built upon truth, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a king who had learned to trust again, and the woman whose single touch had silenced an entire court and changed the course of a kingdom forever.